A member of Lucha Libre royalty by default, Jose Alberto Rodriguez was always likely to enter the family business. With his blood ties to the sport, he was offered opportunities that other prospects probably weren't, giving him good odds of becoming a star. It wasn't always easygoing, but he made it there in the end, establishing himself as a major deal not just in his native Mexico, but also in the United States. For the biggest sports entertainment entity on the planet. Plaudits, major matches, and championship victories may have followed, but Alberto Del Rio's fall was as ugly and undignified as his rise may have been impressive to watch. Backstage fights, unceremonious firings, and serious allegations of a domestic nature reduced a once brilliant performer to a toxic liability whose legacy was irreparably damaged due to his actions. My name is Ross Tweddle from Cultaholic Wrestling, and this is the rise and fall of Alberto Del Rio. Born in San Luis, Mexico on May the 25th, 1977, Jose Rodriguez was the son of the great luchador Dos Caras, the nephew of the iconic Mil Mascaras. One of the greatest heavyweights to emanate from south of the border, Dos Caras was actively touring, not just in Mexico, but also overseas in Japan, while his son was growing up. Rather than attempt to get into professional wrestling at an early age, Rodriguez instead studied architecture and earned a degree in the subject from the University of San Luis. On top of drawing up blueprints and whatnot, Rodriguez also took up amateur wrestling. More than that, he excelled at the sport and earned a place on his country's Greco-Roman team in 1995. Placing third at the World Junior Championships in 97, Rodriguez also won the Central American and Caribbean Games 3 times in his weight class. His training and tournament triumphs were all, on the surface, leading Rodriguez traveling to Sydney with his team for the 2000 Olympics. However, Mexico ended up not sending a team down under. Various reasons were posited, from funding issues to political squabbling to an incident taking place during a qualifying meet in France, but the upshot was Rodriguez would miss out on the chance to compete for a medal. Realizing that, at 23 years old, he likely couldn't wait another 4 years, Rodriguez decided to turn pro instead. Wrestling under a mask as Dos Caras Jr., he made his professional wrestling debut for the small indie Kageki League in Yamaguchi, Japan on August the 11th, 2000, teaming with his father in a winning main event match in front of around 600 fans. Standing at 6'5" tall and weighing north of 200 pounds, Dos Caras Jr. was larger than most other luchadors and favored a technical style that nodded towards his amateur roots. On September the 4th, 2000, Dos Caras Jr. made his AAA debut, running in to save his father during an angle ahead of making his in-ring debut for the company on a pay-per-view no less on September the 29th. Dos Caras Jr. would spend the first several years of his professional wrestling career splitting his time between Mexico and Japan. But his appetite for real competition persisted, and he entered the fledgling world of MMA just a year after his pro debut, and mere weeks after he and his father both quit AAA. Pitted against Pancrase fighter Kengo Watanabe on a card promoted by Deep Promotions, Dos Caras Jr. was very much considered an underdog in comparison to an opponent with 3 years of professional fighting experience. Granted, Kengo wasn't the greatest fighter in the world, and they were comparable in age and size. But Dos Caras Jr. wasn't tested at this sort of level, even if he did have a pedigree as a grappler. In something of a major upset, Dos Caras Jr. won his first professional MMA fight on August the 18th, 2001, by defeating Watanabe in 50 seconds of the first round in Yokohama, Japan. Wearing a mask in order to protect kayfabe, never mind his face, Caras went to plant Kengo with a belly-to-belly suplex, and when Watanabe posted his hand to the mat, he broke his arm, thus ending the contest. A fluke, perhaps, but the win put Dos Caras Jr. on the map and netted him a cool $20,000. Far more money than he could make at that time for a solitary wrestling match. The rematch on March the 30th, 2002 would tell a very different story, with Kengo getting his win back by submission in 3 minutes 52 of the second round. Mind you, that was nothing compared to the drubbing Dos Caras Jr. received at the hands of the terrifying Croatian super striker Mirko Krokop on October the 5th, 2003, in just 46 seconds of the first round. A high kick to the head sent the luchador packing. The punch to the face he received while already knocked out was deemed by many to be unnecessary insult to injury. Rodriguez would continue fighting professionally up until 2010, racking up 9 wins and 5 losses on shows of varying repute. As far as his professional wrestling career was concerned, he began working a lot more regularly as a signing with CMLL in 2005. Business in CMLL was good at the time, and Dos Caras Jr. was pushed as a star, even though there were some who believed his talent didn't necessarily warrant it, and felt much of the hype was due to his famous name. As good an amateur wrestler as he was, Rodriguez initially struggled to set the world of Lucha Libre alight, before realizing his superstar potential and bagging the CMLL World Heavyweight title on July the 8th, 2007. It was a title he would go on to hold for 533 days all told. Dark days as far as CMLL was concerned, because the company was struggling with declining attendances and backstage turmoil. Incredibly, Dos Caras Jr. would only defend the title twice during his mammoth run. Even more incredibly, he was holding the title when it was reported that he was more than likely WWE bound. WWE invited Dos Caras Jr. to attend their SmackDown taping in Tulsa, Oklahoma on July the 11th, 2008. The company had been interested in him for a while, and then talent relations head John Laurinaitis had actually spoken to Caras in Japan previously, when WWE were on tour and he was in the country for an MMA fight. At the time, Caras told Johnny Ace that while he wanted to go to WWE one day, he was making more money in Mexico as an in-demand talent on a good nightly rate. Laurinaitis, naturally, told him he was making a massive mistake by passing up such a wonderful opportunity. Isn't the WWE great? Come the summer of 2008, WWE felt the need for a new Hispanic star to build around, with concerns over the long-term health and durability of Rey Mysterio, who had occasionally been sidelined due to one injury or another. Not long after, it was reported that WWE had offered Caras Jr. a contract, only for him to turn it down because the company wanted him to report their developmental system, rather than going straight to the main roster. So began a saga that dragged on for several months, with differing reports emerging regarding his status. Caras himself even went on CMLL television on August the 4th and claimed that he hadn't signed and furthermore didn't like what WWE had offered him. He would finally put pen to paper in early October, ostensibly leaving the company on bad terms. He would say that CMLL never cared whether he stayed or not, despite the fact he was their reigning heavyweight champion. In an interview, Caras Jr. claimed that he only stayed with the company for as long as he did because he signed a contract with them and wanted to honor it, but noted that the company was in rough shape. His plan was to vacate the title, not take it to WWE, quelling any fears they may have had about subterfuge. Then, after all of that, it turned out he hadn't actually signed with WWE after all. Dos Caras Jr. had an offer come in, sure he did, but he was still mulling it over. And after it thought he was a dead cert to say yes, he changed his mind, claiming the money wasn't enough and complaining that he was being treated like some rookie when he was already a proven star. WWE attempted to get Caras to work their fall tour of Mexico, but he refused and instead committed to working for CMLL until at least early 2009. People who knew Caras Jr. in Mexico bet that he wouldn't last long in WWE when he got there due to his personality, with some wrestlers saying he was very much his uncle's son in reference to the legendary large ego of Mil Mascaras. After saying he had turned down 3 separate contract offers, Rodriguez returned his heavyweight title to CMLL in late November, telling them he was starting with WWE in 6 weeks. After rumors that he would debut in the Royal Rumble went unfounded, Rodriguez then announced he would not be going to WWE at all and would instead sign a new 4-year deal with CMLL. Is it just me, or is anyone else having a hard time keeping up? He's in, he's out, he's shaking it all about. WWE, for their part, claimed they decided against bringing him in because they didn't like what they saw from him during his tryout, even though they definitely offered him a contract. Then, In June of 2009, it was confirmed that Dos Caras Jr. would in fact be going to WWE, signing a 3-year deal with Vince McMahon's organization. For realsies this time, I promise. He's all in there now, I swear. Stop asking. CMLL's business had dipped from what it had been when he had decided to stay initially, while WWE's business in Mexico was strong and only growing stronger. Prior to relocating to Florida, Rodriguez no-showed his last scheduled date in Mexico. Learning the WWE style at the company's Florida Championship Wrestling facility in Tampa, Caras was joined by his cousin, El Cico Delico Jr. Early reports were that they were not adapting well to their new surroundings, finding it hard to figure out the WWE style while also exactly not showing much charisma in their promos. Rodriguez had to have been miffed, since he signed a deal and went to FCW on the belief that not only would he be fast-tracked to Raw or SmackDown, but that his name would not be changed and his mask would remain on. What a shocker that they immediately changed his name and then took his mask off, eh? Rodriguez was also irritated that he had to attend practice with comparative beginners and work small shows in front of few fans. It was a major come down from wrestling in front of large crowds in Mexico and Japan. He might have been irked at having to pay his dues all over again, but it was explained to him by his trainers that it was an important part of the process so that his co-workers, who perhaps didn't know of his previous exploits, wouldn't resent him. Rodriguez later credited his trainers, including Tom Pritchard, Norman Smiley, Steve Kern, and Dusty Rhodes, for helping him during those tough first few months. After getting something of a push in FCW, Dos Caras Jr. was sent on the road with the main roster for the Raw brand's April 2010 tour of Europe. Wrestling 10 matches in 10 straight days, Dos Caras, who dropped the Junior presumably because of Vince McMahon's well-known long-standing hatred of the term, worked with the likes of Christian, William Regal, MVP, and Evan Bourne. WWE were encouraged to get the ball rolling with Caras because Mysterio's injury issues were rearing their ugly little head once again, and the company felt they needed to have somebody else ready for the growing Mexican market. The belief within WWE at the time was that Mysterio was one knee injury away from potential retirement. Keep in mind, this was almost 15 years ago. The high-flying Hall of Famer is still going strong. Behind the scenes, Spanish-speaking WWE performers were telling Caras to keep quiet for his own sake, since he had a reputation in Mexico for speaking his mind backstage as well as talking freely to the wrestling press. In a new environment, such outspokenness would doubtless work against him, and it was stressed to him that his apparent aloofness may rub some people up the wrong way. Caras was allowed to put the mask back on for WWE's May 2010 tour of Mexico, where he worked as a babyface and was naturally very over, beating Regal and Chavo Guerrero in well-received matches. He continued to work dark matches at television tapings during the spring and summer, but as a heel, with his shtick being that he would cut a promo in Spanish, then immediately cut another one in English, chastising the fans for not understanding the first one. One of the big positives WWE saw in Caras was that he was bilingual. After briefly trying out the name Alberto Castillo, the first vignette hyping the imminent debut of Alberto Del Rio aired on the 25th of June 2010 edition of SmackDown. Portraying a really fancy playboy who lived in a large mansion, Del Rio displayed previously unseen ample amounts of charisma as he spoke directly to the camera. The vignette treatment was a tried and tested way of introducing a new character, and they made Alberto seem like a big deal right off the bat. No surprise that he got a decent reaction when he eventually made his televised debut on the August the 20th episode of SmackDown by interrupting and then getting into a physical confrontation with Rey Mysterio. That set up a main event match between the two, with Del Rio making a superstar entrance that signaled WWE had major plans for him. Arriving to the arena in a Rolls Royce, he also got the benefit of personalized pyro and his own Spanish-speaking personal ring announcer, Ricardo Rodriguez. The dream debut was capped off with Alberto beating Rey clean via submission with a cross-arm breaker. A home run on every level. WWE certainly helped Del Rio, but the man himself showed he could handle the pressure and deliver when called upon. From there, Del Rio was positioned towards the top of the SmackDown card. Regrettably, his feud with Mysterio was instantly put on the back burner due to the mask masked man suffering an inner ear imbalance that prevented him from taking bumps. Not that it slowed Alberto down any. He hit the road with the Blue Brand's roster and began racking up the victories. In October, Del Rio returned to Mexico and worked prominent matches against Mysterio in Mexico City, with his father working as the special guest referee, as well as tag team matches teaming with Kane against Mysterio and The Undertaker in Mexico City and Guadalajara. He was also chosen to participate in the third season of the game show version of NXT, first mentoring Conor O'Brien before Alberto was picked by Brodus Clay to act as his pro. Brodus didn't win the competition, but he soon began accompanying Del Rio as his bodyguard on television. It was another accoutrement that sent the message that WWE were invested in turning Alberto into a top-level heel. At December's TLC pay-per-view, Del Rio competed for Edge's World Heavyweight title in the titular stipulation match. The Rated R superstar would retain in the bout, also featuring Mysterio and Kane. But to be even in the mix showed what WWE management thought of Del Rio, who, all things considered, had enjoyed a remarkable first few months on the main roster. Things would only get better in 2011 as Alberto was chosen to win that year's Royal Rumble match. Entering the 40-man field, because if it ain't broke, you definitely have to fix it, don't you? Del Rio eliminated Randy Orton and then Santino Marella to book a world title match at WrestleMania 27. I mean, I'd say book a world title match in the main event of WrestleMania 27, but that was by no means a guarantee anymore. Heading into his showcase of the Immortal Showdown with Edge, Del Rio was booked very strongly. The general assumption was that the then 33-year-old would be walking out of Atlanta with the gold. A year ago, remember, he'd been wrestling in front of handfuls of people in a Florida warehouse. In front of his whole family, Alberto opened the show with Edge in a decent back-and-forth contest. Unfortunately for the challenger, it was not to be his night as he succumbed to a spear. According to Del Rio, he was in fact scheduled to win the match up until 2 hours before the event, when WWE management informed him that Edge would be going over instead, so as not to be too predictable. Piling on the, at least kayfabe misery, the Ultimate Opportunist destroyed Del Rio's car after the match. In the grand scheme of things, this was hardly important in comparison to the news that Edge would have to retire due to his injured neck. Edge had informed WWE management of his woes the day after Mania, before telling the world a week later on Raw in a very emotional address. With the title vacant, Del Rio would get another shot at the strap when he met Edge's former tag partner and real-life best friend Christian, who had been heavily involved in the feud leading up to WrestleMania after Del Rio was credited with causing his torn pec muscle in September of 2010. At Extreme Rules 2011, Alberto yet again came up short, this time losing a ladder match to Captain Charisma when Edge distracted him by tooting the horn of a Jeep. Del Rio was far from finished as a title contender, of course, and kept plugging away until the exceptional Money in the Bank pay-per-view, where he earned another world title match by winning the Raw Money in the Bank ladder match. Kicking off SummerSlam, the briefcase holder was on the losing side of his 6-man tag. However, this was likely a means of throwing fans off the scent for what was to come later in the night. After unifying his WWE title against John Cena's in the main event, CM Punk was attacked by a returning Kevin Nash, who laid out the champ with a jackknife powerbomb, opening the door for Del Rio to cash in his contract and pin the straight edge superstar to win his first title in WWE. It was a major milestone for the former Mexican performer who had just established himself as a bona fide headliner after just a year on WWE television. The road ahead would be bumpy. Over the course of the next 4 pay-per-views, Alberto lost, regained, retained, and then lost the WWE title once again. He dropped it to Cena at Night of Champions, won it back in a triple threat Hell in a Cell match with Cena and Punk at the namesake event, retained over Cena at Vengeance in a match that took place in a ring broken thanks to Big Show and Mark Henry, and then dropped it back to Punk at Survivor Series. It had been a banner year for Del Rio, but it ended on a sour note when he sustained a torn groin in a tag match on Boxing Day. It not only kept him out of the ring for a few months, but also ensured he didn't factor into plans for WrestleMania 28, which had to have been a blow to his bank balance if nothing else. Reports in the run-up to the show suggested that Del Rio was not well liked backstage at this time because of how he carried himself, with some holding the opinion he was not quite the superstar he thought he was. Alberto, for his part, gave an interview with a Bay Area sports radio station altercation in which he admitted he didn't like many of his colleagues, specifically mentioning The Miz as someone he hated and had tried to fight outside of the ring multiple times. Whether liked by his peers or not, Del Rio spent much of the rest of 2012 scrapping with World Heavyweight Champion Sheamus, which included a lame storyline where he attempted to get the Brogue Kick banned. He was unsuccessful in either capturing the title or having the Celtic Warriors finisher outlawed. Del Rio started 2013 in style when he defeated the Big Show to win the World Heavyweight title in a last man standing match on the January 11th edition of SmackDown. Now a fiery fighting babyface, Alberto entered into a program with Jack Swagger, which saw him topple the All-American American at WrestleMania 29. On the post-WrestleMania edition of Raw, Del Rio's title reign came to an end in dramatic fashion, as Dolph Ziggler cashed in his Money in the Bank contract after Alberto had beaten Swagger and Seb Coulter in a handicap match. As before, he wasn't without gold for too long, winning the title back from the show-off 2 months later at Payback. The match functioned as a rare double turn. It was for the best, really. Del Rio's babyface run had been a bust, and it was plain to see that he was much better suited to playing a villain. Title defenses against Ziggler, Christian, and Rob Van Dam were typically enjoyable, but he couldn't get past old foe John Cena, who took the title from him at Hell in a Cell before retaining it against Alberto at Survivor Series. Del Rio's push stalled in 2014 as he was used to heat Batista up for the Animals planned WrestleMania title match with Randy Orton. Bumped down from world title contender to chasing for supposed secondary titles like the Intercontinental and United States Championships, Alberto himself was only good enough for a spot in the inaugural Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal at WrestleMania 30. His last match for WWE during this first run was the main event of Money in the Bank 2014, where his attempt to win the WWE title in an 8-man ladder match, ultimately won by John Cena, was fruitless. On August the 7th, 2014, WWE.com announced that Alberto Del Rio had been released due to unprofessional conduct and an altercation with an employee. And so it begins. In a rather staggering series of tweets the next day, WWE added that Del Rio was responsible for his own actions, and if you're angry at anyone, be angry at Alberto, before noting there's no excuse for a pro athlete not to conduct themselves in a professional manner. Clearly, there was more to this story than met the eye. According to reports, Del Rio got into a physical altercation with an employee named Cody Barbieri backstage at the August the 5th taping in Laredo, Texas. One version of the story said that someone made a comment to Barbieri in catering about cleaning food off his plate, to which Barbieri allegedly said something to the effect of, "Isn't that what people like Del Rio are here for?" When word got back to Alberto, he confronted Barbieri and demanded an apology. When none was forthcoming, he proceeded to slap the holy hell out of WWE's manager of social media for live events. Del Rio was then told by Vince McMahon, after he worked a match with Jack Swagger taped for WWE Main Event, that he would be receiving a 2-week suspension for his actions along with a $5,000 fine. The belief was that Barbieri then threatened to sue, prompting Paul Triple H Levesque to call Alberto and let him go. Del Rio was justifiably furious, believing he was wronged partly due to the perceived racist remark. In Mexico and back in the territory days, his physical response would have more than likely gone unpunished. But in 2014 WWE, a superstar was expected to file a complaint with HR, not literally take matters into his own hands. Alberto would later say he was embarrassed by his reaction, but didn't necessarily regret it, adding that it wasn't the first time he'd been an issue with Barbieri's skewed sense of humor. For what it's worth, the much disliked Barbieri left WWE in October of 2014. Del Rio, meanwhile, returned to AAA at the first opportunity, showing up as Alberto El Patron at Triple Mania on August the 17th. AAA had been interested in bringing in Alberto for a while, and it was common knowledge that the former WWE champion would leave Vince McMahon's organization sooner rather than later, since he was tired of the grind on the road, his decreasing push, and with it, the lighter paychecks. His contract had been set to expire in February of 2015, and every indication was that he would not be re-signing. The terms of Del Rio's release initially included a 1-year no-compete with regards to any US-based wrestling or MMA companies. Since he was fired for assaulting an employee, he also surrendered his rights to royalties for the same time period, at least according to WWE's contract terms. Alberto and his lawyers obviously didn't think that would stand up in a court of law, and they would be right, so he began accepting independent dates pretty much immediately. A major deal on the indie circuit, Alberto El Patron commanded a handsome fee for appearances. Along with AAA, he worked for Ring of Honor, Lucha Underground, and Japan's Wrestle One promotion, as well as select US and international indie outfits. He also got a gig as an announcer for the MMA group Combate Americas, a company he'd one day be named president of. A man in demand, Alberto got himself into even better shape and received plaudits for his effort in his matches. It wasn't all rosy, mind, with one notable show in July of 2015. According to Clutch City Productions and Lone Star Championship Wrestling, who had teamed up to put on a benefit for an autism charity, Alberto failed to show up for either show or a pre-show autograph session. Having provided an upfront deposit and paid for first-class airfare and a 4-star hotel, Alberto neglected to come to Houston for the event, raising concerns for his well-being. He later tweeted that he was unable to attend due to personal reasons and that the organizers had done everything they could to get him there. Eyebrows were raised, but not much more was made of it, and Alberto continued traveling the world and plying his trade. Alberto El Patron's world tour came to a sudden end on October the 25th, 2015, when he unexpectedly answered the open challenge of United States champion John Cena at WWE's Hell in a Cell pay-per-view. Introduced by his one-time enemy Zeb Colter, Alberto Del Rio's appearance was a total and utter surprise. Even more surprising still was him actually beating Cena clean within 8 minutes and ending his, frankly awesome as we all know, US title run. Alberto now had 2 titles in his possession, as he was also reigning as the AAA Mega Champion when he re-signed with WWE. Compelled to give WWE another go when they approached him with a lucrative offer, with a reportedly very healthy downside guarantee around the $1.5 million mark, Del Rio realized that at his age, and after so many years in the business, it was important to make the most money he could before his body inevitably began to break down. Although he had tentatively agreed to work AAA dates in November, his WWE deal essentially made that impossible, since he was the US champ and the company had their annual autumn tour of Europe right around the corner, not to mention Survivor Series just after that. Plus, and this is key, AAA never actually signed Del Rio to a contract. You live and learn, I suppose. The AAA Mega Championship was vacated when El Patron reverted back to Del Rio, though Alberto had his eyes on a grander prize, namely the WWE title, which had been vacated when Seth Rollins suffered a serious knee injury in, of all places, Dublin, Ireland on November the 4th. Del Rio made it to the semi-finals of a tournament to crown a new champion, falling to Roman Reigns at Survivor Series. After ditching Zeb Colter, it's gotta be said their pairing was off from the off, Alberto joined up with Sheamus, Wade Barrett and Rusev in the League of Nations, a group that looked good on paper but was basically willed into existence to assist the project known as Get the Big Dog Over. In addition to making Roman look strong, Del Rio played hot potato with the US title in a series of matches with Kalisto, the latest in the long line of next Rey Mysterios, eventually losing it to the master of the good lucha things proper at the Royal Rumble. The League of Nations were then put out of their misery not long after WrestleMania, where they beat the New Day but were firmly put in their place by Mick Foley, Shawn Michaels and Steve Austin. Del Rio floundered from there, losing more matches than he won and not really getting a sniff at any significant storylines. Then, on August the 18th, 2016, WWE announced that Del Rio had been suspended for 30 days for his first violation of the company's wellness policy. It was to be the unceremonious end to Alberto Del Rio's WWE career, but was by no means the end of his problems. Those, I'm afraid, were only just beginning. On September the 9th, word came out that Del Rio had officially departed WWE. His lawyers had actually sent a letter to WWE back in June stating his client's intention to opt out from mid-September, as, even though he had signed for several years, both Alberto and the WWE had an opt-out option after 1 year. As usual with Alberto, there was more to the story than just him being dismayed at his faltering push, after allegedly being promised a main event run with Paul Heyman as his manager. or being popped by a random drug test. Behind the scenes, Rodriguez has started a relationship with Saraya Bevis, also known as WWE star Paige, who, incidentally, was also handed a 30-day suspension for a wellness policy violation on August the 18th. One more gripe that Del Rio may have had with WWE was being switched to SmackDown during the draft, while his girlfriend remained on Raw. Many believe that WWE did not want the couple to be together, and that was their way of trying to manufacture a split. It was also reported around this time that Alberto's soon-to-be ex-wife, Angel Rodriguez, had filed papers saying that their marriage ended on May the 27th after photos of Del Rio and Paige together were made public. Her lawyers were also asking for a restraining order against him so as to limit contact between them. Alberto himself claimed that their marriage had effectively ended in June of 2015, alleging cruel treatment from her towards him, and had filed for divorce in Mexico in July 2016, with the request that his wife undergo a psychological evaluation. Evidently, this was an ugly divorce, with both parties wanting custody of the children as well as ownership of the home they once shared. As for Paige, she was rumored to have quit the WWE after her boo took off. With around 3 years remaining on her contract, WWE weren't about to let her go. Paige also claimed that she hadn't failed a drug test and her failure was merely a procedural issue, saying she wasn't home when she was contacted about a random test by the Aegis agency before driving herself 200 miles to complete one but didn't make it in time, while passing a test several days later. As was the case after his 2014 release, there was no shortage of suitors courting Alberto's services, with AAA, CMLL, Lucha Underground, Ring of Honor, TNA, and New Japan all making inquiries about booking him. At a press conference in Mexico City on September the 9th, Del Rio, accompanied by Paige, who didn't speak and wasn't acknowledged, spoke about his future, expressing his desire to work a limited schedule as a freelancer for the next 2 years before retiring. It also came to light that his wellness policy violation had been for a banned performance-enhancing drug and not a recreational one. In an interview, Del Rio noted that he had been undergoing testosterone replacement therapy under the supervision of a doctor. TRT was prohibited by WWE's wellness policy. Retaking the name Alberto El Patron, Rodriguez would be a busy boy for the next few years as he wrestled all over the world. Sadly, his name would more often than not be in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. On October the 2nd, 2016, Alberto failed to appear at AAA show in Monterrey. The company changed their scheduled main event accordingly and then released a pretty scathing press release after the event, saying El Patron had let the Mexican fans down. Their tune changed the following day when Alberto posted photos of multiple wounds he had suffered in an apparent knife attack in San Antonio, Texas, just before he was due to board a flight to Mexico. Per MLW Radio, who were close with Alberto, the wrestler got into an argument with a driver who crashed into his car. The driver then pulled a knife and a fight ensued. Alberto was, according to MLW, able to fight the man off, but not before he was slashed several times with the attacker's weapon. On October the 10th, Paige was slapped with a 60-day suspension for her second violation of WWE's wellness policy. Crying foul, the former Divas champion took to Twitter to say she had a valid prescription and complained that the rules of the wellness policy, in her opinion, applied only depending on the superstar's status. Her family all publicly backed her up and lambasted WWE's handling of the situation and inferred that the company weren't taking her neck injury as seriously as they ought to be. WWE themselves put out a statement noting that Paige had tested positive for an illegal substance, not a prescription drug, and continued to provide world-class care for her as she recovered from that neck injury. Another story not adding up was the stabbing incident from 8 days before. A new version of the story had Alberto and Paige leaving a San Antonio restaurant on their way to the airport so that they could fly to Monterrey for the AAA show. That's when a homeless man is said to have attacked Alberto and stabbed him twice. Alberto himself then said that someone had disrespected Paige and they got into a fight. In that version, Paige was thrown to the ground by the man who was then subdued by Alberto. That's 3 different stories of what went down, and I'm not sure he ever properly got to the bottom of what actually happened. But it quickly became old news when Paige proposed to Alberto in the ring after his match in Puerto Rico on October the 16th. Alberto accepted, and the two celebrated on the island of enchantment. In England, the news of the engagement was not well received by Paige's father, wrestler Ricky Knight, who wrote, "Putting this out there, saying no more about it to anyone. I am totally against my daughter marrying this man. Statement over." That's before he promptly deleted it. The attorney for Alberto's estranged wife also released a statement, noting their divorce was not yet officially finalized, while adding that should watch carefully how Alberto is denying and treating his current wife and the mother of his children in his divorce. History repeats itself. Did the lovebirds care about these external opinions? Well, they went and got each other's names permanently tattooed onto their skin. So what do you think? 3 days after she asked the big question, Paige underwent major neck surgery in Tampa, Florida. On December the 12th, Alberto and Paige were back in the news, this time for a backstage brawl at an IWRG show in Juarez. The couple were there to watch Alberto's brother, El Hijo de Dos Caras, in the show's main event. According to witnesses, Alberto got into a fight with wrestler Rafi, also known as Alan Extreme, because Rodriguez believed that he had touched Paige in an inappropriate manner. Blows were exchanged, with Rafi coming out of the scuffle in far, far worse shape. According to another report, Alberto had gotten into a very heated argument with Robbie E at a show in Puerto Rico on December the 3rd, again over something to do with Paige. Rounding out the air, Rodriguez had another round of fisticuffs, 2 rounds of fisticuffs actually, in Austria. On December the 30th, Alberto and his brother were both arrested in the early hours of Saturday morning while attending a party in the city of Leoben. It was reported that the two brothers had gotten into a physical altercation with a 26-year-old male fan after a show on the Friday evening. They ended up beating up the fan so badly he was hospitalized. When police took the brothers to the station, they ended up getting into a fight with each other, ending when Alberto knocked out his younger sibling. It supposedly took 10 officers to separate them, and police had to use zip ties to subdue Alberto. When he broke them, they used shackles to cuff his feet, which finally calmed him down. Damage was reportedly caused to the furniture inside the station, with blood staining the walls. Regardless, the brothers were allowed to leave the country, and the charges were forwarded to the authorities in both men's places of residence. As far as I can tell, it wasn't exactly followed up on. Mr. Patron's erratic behavior endured, however. In April, he delivered a drunken rant on Periscope, blasting Triple H with some language I can't really repeat here, while noting that he and Paige planned on getting married in June. There would be no wedding though, and in fact, a very public blow-up that summer proved to be the beginning of the end of what had been, by all accounts, a very tumultuous relationship. On July the 9th, 2017, there was an alleged domestic violence between Alberto and Paige at Orlando International Airport, where the couple were going to board a flight to an independent show in El Paso, Texas. Witnesses claimed that Alberto roughed up his fiancée after the two had an argument in an airport restaurant, which ended in Paige throwing a beverage over him before attempting to flee in an effort to get away from him. Audio obtained by TMZ, recorded by a female wrestling fan who was there, showed Paige screaming at Alberto to get away from her and get out of her life. Alberto could be heard telling the lady recording that Paige is the one who needed to be arrested because she had assaulted him. Paige tried to claim afterwards that it was actually the fan who had thrown a drink on Del Rio, which the fan denied. The fan also said that Paige had been shouting about Alberto doing cocaine for 2 days straight and called him abusive, screaming that he ruined her life and her career. According to the fan, Alberto had said something along the lines of, "Check her bag, the coke's in there, it's all hers," at which point the fan, who pointed out that Alberto carried a strong smell of alcohol on him, began recording the argument. Paige would soon admit that it was indeed her who had thrown the drink at Alberto, saying it was beer, which is why he smelled of alcohol, because she was angry over a comment he had made about her uncle, who was in poor health. According to witnesses, Alberto had told Paige he hoped her uncle died, because he was upset over how long she had been talking to somebody at the phone. The couple immediately reconciled and tried to play down the severity of the situation. One of Rodriguez's employers, Global Force Wrestling, on the other hand, provisionally suspended Alberto. Their champion, by the way, pending the results of a police investigation. For those in the know, this was just the latest in a long line of incidents, the majority of which had gone unreported. It was said that the pair frequently broke up, only to inevitably get back together after, and they fought often. Paige's family were outspoken in their dislike of Alberto, with her older brother Roy accusing him of trying to get her fired from WWE by making public threats against them, including just days earlier when WWE visited San Antonio. He also said that he had photographic evidence of the physical abuse his sister had suffered at the ex-MMA fighter's hands. Her older brother Zach, meanwhile, publicly expressed concern over his sister's well-being while reiterating what Roy had said about the physical beatings. Imploring people keep an eye on her, he openly worried that she would end up like Amy Winehouse or Whitney Houston. Mercifully, the anti-Divas fate would not be a tragic one. In November of 2017, Paige and Alberto officially broke up for good this time. They cited not being able to spend time with each other anymore, now that Paige was clear to wrestle and back on the road with WWE, and Alberto was busy with various business commitments, not to mention looking after his children, as the main reason for the split. Speaking about his ex-fiancée in the media, Alberto wished her nothing but the best. Alberto's GFW suspension ended when he wasn't charged with anything stemming from the airport incident. Their union would last until April of 2018, when Global Force/Impact Wrestling fired Alberto for no showing a combined show with Lucha Underground, which he was set to main event during WrestleMania 34 weekend, as well as an autograph session the very next day. Alberto claimed he missed the show because he was sick, but those who saw him in New Orleans said he wasn't acting normally. True to form, Alberto changed his story days later and blamed his no-show on a family issue. His Impact contract had expired around the same time anyway. They were negotiating a new deal, even though Alberto had met with Vince McMahon at WWE headquarters on February the 28th to discuss a potential return that never materialized. Rodriguez had recently apologized to Paul Levesque for all his grandstand challenges too. He was never a Triple H guy anyway, but Vince McMahon loved the character and was always in the market for a bilingual, tall, Mexican star with a good physique and prestigious family lineage. Those were few and far between, hence why Del Rio got so many chances. Another WWE run was not on the cards, and for the next 2.5 years, El Patron primarily worked for smaller promotions in the US, Mexico, and Puerto Rico. He also came out of MMA retirement to fight Tito Ortiz on a Combat Americas card on December the 7th, 2019. Rodriguez was humbled by the Huntington Beach bad boy, forced to submit to a chokehold in the first round. 6 months later, Alberto would find himself in a very different type of cage. On May the 7th, 2020, Jose Alberto Rodriguez was arrested on a charge relating to the alleged abuse of his then-girlfriend, which is said to have taken place in Alberto's San Antonio home on the evening of May the 3rd and early morning of May the 4th. Charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, he was released on May the 10th on a $50,000 bond. According to the victim, the incident began when Alberto accused her of being unfaithful. He wanted her to admit it, and when she wouldn't, she alleged that he slapped her in the head twice and took her down to his downstairs bedroom. She claimed he then open-hand slapped her 8 more times and ordered her to put on a dress and dance for him. When she refused, he is alleged to have warned her not to cry, otherwise he would take her and her son and drop him off in the middle of the road somewhere. In addition, it was alleged that Rodriguez smashed her phone, destroyed her computer, and attempted to burn her passport. The woman, described as being 5'5", weighing 132 pounds and speaking only Spanish, leveled further accusations of assault that are so graphic we are unable to repeat them here. In October, Alberto was indicted on 4 counts of assault and 1 count of kidnapping in relation to the incident. He faced potentially decades behind bars, along with hefty fines if convicted. Not long after he was indicted, Paige opened up about her stormy relationship with Rodriguez during an appearance on the Grown Ass Woman podcast. According to Paige, Alberto, who she never actually called by name, would lock her in rooms for hours and beat her every couple of minutes. She would initially fight back, she said, but became trapped in a cycle where the beatings would occur almost daily. Paige added that her ex's arrest was karma and that he deserved everything that was coming his way. Rodriguez responded via TMZ, saying that the abuse was actually the other way around and that he had the photos to prove it. He also threatened to sue Paige for defamation, saying she had broken a non-disclosure agreement both signed when they broke up 3 years earlier. Before this pending case could go to trial, Alberto's ex-girlfriend recounted her story and apologized to him and his family. Alberto pushed the narrative that his girlfriend, who he may have been engaged to, made the accusations up in revenge for being cheated on by him. Police had seen evidence of bruises and other marks on her body, however, so while she attempted to have the charges dropped and stopped cooperating with authorities, the state of Texas pursued the matter. The case would ultimately be thrown out on December the 10th, 2021, just days before it was scheduled to go to trial when a key witness did not turn up. At a press conference in Mexico City 10 days later, Alberto said the results of the investigation proved he was innocent of all charges, while warning his ex-fiancée Paige that he had footage that could get her fired by the WWE if she ever talked negatively about him in public again. On May the 6th, 2022, Alberto was booked for a show in Monterrey, Mexico for the Chaos promotion. Told by promoter Alonso Botello to arrive at the building by 3 p.m. or else he would be removed from the lineup and not paid, Alberto didn't turn up until 2 hours later, by which point the show was already in progress. Botello asked security to not let him into the building, but Rodriguez forced his way in anyway. Alberto's father and brother were filmed arguing with Botello, who ultimately let El Patron work on the show. As of the time of recording this video, that was the last incident involving Patron, who is now 46 years old and works select dates for promotions, including AAA. He's still a fixture in Mexican culture and even participated in the country's celebrity version of Bake Off in 2023. The man who won WWE's Royal Rumble, Money in the Bank, and World Title in the same calendar year is by no means doing badly. But for the best part of a decade, the talk about Alberto has tended to be about his bizarre behavior and unsavory outside the ring episodes. A probable Hall of Famer if he had kept his nose clean, the likelihood of WWE or any other major wrestling promotion for that matter acknowledging him, let alone using him, is beyond slim. An admittedly fantastic wrestler in his day and a true cross-cultural star, Rodriguez's career may have been littered with highlights and accolades, but it is hard to look past the numerous, very serious incidents and allegations that have plagued him. He stands a stark reminder that sometimes the most talented performers can also be the most volatile.